From humble beginnings to legendary award-winning journalist, Jaime Maussan has been trusted as the voice of the people in Mexico for more than 47 years.
Por primera vez, el público tiene acceso directo a información de un caso ovni que no ha podido ser explicado en términos de la tecnología y el conocimiento terrestres. Este caso fue cuidadosamente estudiado por el equipo de 60 minutos y resulta tan sorprendente como fascinante.
Acompañan con el tema de ovnis. Licenciado Arturo Garza Rodríguez, director del programa Alternativa OVNI. Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Gracias por estar con nosotros. Señor Joel Zapallo Climaco, reportero del aire y escéptico. Buenos días. Gracias también por estar con nosotros. Señor licenciado Jaime Maussan. Buenos días. Gracias también por acompañarnos.
In the mid-90s, Maussan brought the subject of UFOs to the spotlight.
Then I became the anchor and finally the director of this show that was on the air until 1995. From then on, I became involved with something that I thought was very important, UFOs. I know many people think that they are not important, that they are an illusion or fantasy, but I realized that many people had cameras at the beginning of the 90s and they were able to record the UFOs. And I thought that I had a chance with these evidences to change the way people think.
Maussan has received the United Nations Global 500 Award, 3 times the National Prize of Journalism in Mexico, the Ondas Award for Journalists in Spain. He was recognized at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Currently, he is presenting Third Millennium News from Monday to Friday at 10 p.m. on national television. This news has set the standard for audience records for the channel A+, más on several occasions. Tercer Milenio continues to be presented every Sunday on prime time after 22 years of uninterrupted transmission on Mexican TV.
I was not going to be a journalist. I was going to be an administrative worker for my father. He had a company, and he wished that I was able to take care of his company. And I never thought that I wanted to be a journalist, because 50 years ago, the journalists in Mexico were not very honest. They wanted money for everything they put on the TV or in a newspaper. My father was a rancher. He had bullfights. He was also empresario for big bull rings. He organized bullfights. Even my aunt was a bullfighter. Then I was going to become one. But at the same time, my father wanted me to take care of his business. But in the last day, when I had to choose my major, a friend of mine came to me and asked me what was going to be my future, what kind of major I was going to choose, business administration, something like that. And he said, "Oh, that's boring." And I said, "Why?" "Because it's just numbers, it's just, in a closed place with no windows, so on." And I said, "What are you going to study?" He said, "Journalism." And I said, "Oh, you're going to be a corrupt man, you are going to take money from people." And he said, "No, journalism is to change the world. Journalism is the possibility to create conscience. Journalism is traveling. Journalism is going into the open and reporting what you find." And I like that. And I immediately changed my major, probably the best decision I have done in my life. Then I decided, but my father didn't like the idea. And at the same time, he knew that the journalists in Mexico were corrupt. And I said to my father, "I will never, ever, Father, take any money from anyone I'm going to be a very clean and honest journalist. And I have kept that promise until now. I've been an honest man all my life. And thanks to that, I've been able to develop credibility. When I was a young kid, I saw the destruction of nature, but I didn't know why I didn't like it. I knew that the animals were being killed, that there was business doing with animals, that anybody could take an animal from their habitats and sell it. And when I found journalism, when I found my real passion for life, I really started to try to change my world. And I was able to do it in many ways because I worked in television with the most important journalist of Mexico, Jacobo Zabludovsky, the Walter Cronkite of the US, a man that was very well known everywhere in Mexico. And I became very close to him, in many ways his right hand, even though I was almost a teenager. When I did my first report, I took my report to Cannes in France. I was just 19. And I received a scholarship from the US, from an American university, University of Ohio. And I was able to finish my career then. When I came back, I started working in journalism to try to protect the environment, to try to protect the woods and the jungles. I was able to find the monarch butterfly in Mexico, their hidden places where they hibernate. Fred Urquhart, a Canadian scientist, is the one who found it. I mean, is the one who really tracked the monarch butterfly. But when he published his article in National Geographic, he never said where it was. My network, Televisa, asked me to go and find the place. It took us 2 years to find it, but we finally did. And I was able to present for the first time to the Mexican people the monarch butterfly, and I was able to get protection for the monarch butterfly. Then, working in 60 Minutes in Mexico as reporter, I was able to get involved with the protection of the turtles. In Mexico, we used to kill the turtles in slaughterhouses. And thanks to my report in 60 Minutes, they were closed. We created laws to protect the turtles, and that's the reason why some of the species of turtles have now recuperated. Then I was able to do many things to speak about the climate change or the global warming back in 1986. I was able to speak about the El Niño current in 87, or the depletion of the ozone layer in 88. We were just two journalists from all around the world who went with NASA to the North Pole to report if there was a hole in the North Pole as the one that had been observed in the South Pole. They found that no, there was not a hole, was a little bit depleted, but we didn't have the same problem because of the currents are different in both poles. Anyway, I was able to be there with a German journalist, and even the NASA people were amazed that they said a reporter, a journalist from the tropical countries here. Why the Americans, why the Europeans are not here, you know? But I was very much involved in the protection of environment, and when I found that news, the Televisa allowed me to go and participate with NASA in these investigations back in the January 1988. And I was able to do many other things, like, for example, to help the Tarahumaras in the Sierra in Mexico. They were dying of hunger and cold also in 88, 87, and we were able to get thousands of tons of food for them with a report in 60 Minutes in Mexico. Then I became the anchor and finally the director of this show that was on the air until 1995. From then on, I became involved with something that I thought was very important, UFOs. I know many people think that they are not important, that they are an illusion or fantasy, but I realized that many people had cameras at the beginning of the 90s, and they were able to record the UFOs. And I thought that I had a chance with these evidences to change the way people think. Back in 1991, there was a total solar eclipse in Mexico. Probably the longest, or the second longest in the whole century, 6 minutes and 54 seconds. And many people in Mexico recorded the solar eclipse, but some people got UFOs in the middle of the videos. And I thought that was very important.
Horas más tarde de este fenómeno astronómico en nuestro país, el noticiario 24 horas de Jacobo Zabludowski dio a conocer el video de Guillermo Arreguín, donde se ve aparentemente a un platillo volador que en la parte superior era plateado y en la inferior era de color oscuro y que parecía que estaba girando y que se mantuvo por varios minutos sobrevolando la Ciudad de México. Días después aparecieron más filmaciones y con esto el inicio de la oleada ovni más importante de los años 90 y que hasta la fecha se mantiene vigente, pero también sembró entre los mexicanos la cultura de voltear nuevamente hacia el cielo. Desde luego hubo varias voces que se pronunciaron porque se trataba de una mala interpretación o que era el planeta Venus. Sin embargo, esas mismas voces al 2009 no han presentado los análisis o investigaciones pertinentes para cerrar de tajo tal polémica. Lo que sí nos queda claro es que este objeto volador no identificado fue captado desde diversos puntos de la zona centro de la República Mexicana, lo que implica directamente que no se trató de una recreación, ya que en la mayoría de los videos se ve al mismo objeto. Esta grabación le dio la vuelta al mundo y ha sido presentada en diversos medios de comunicación. El eclipse total de sol del 11 de julio marcó una nueva era para el estudio e investigación del fenómeno ovni en nuestro país, ya que ahora la sociedad tenía en sus manos el equipo electrónico necesario para videograbar aquellos objetos extraños que antes solo se limitaba a platicar o a decir yo vi, y dieron cuenta así de la importancia de las cámaras de video.
I was invited to this program because I had done a report on 60 Minutes about Billy Mayer, and people identified me, but as a matter of fact, I didn't want to go to this television show because I thought that UFOs were not good for journalists, that they were very risky, and I shouldn't get involved with this. But my company, my network, asked me to go to this show, Usted ¿Qué opina? And it was so successful that they asked me to go for a second time, and I didn't want to go. I really didn't want to go. I said, that's it, no more UFOs, please. But this man insisted, please, this is the last time, let's do another show, because you know how many people saw these, millions and millions and millions of people, and I want to do a new one. And I say, okay, but this is the last one. This is really the last show. And I went there, and I was able to find these videos that were recorded by some people of the eclipse, where they found UFOs. When I presented this very early in the morning, probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, it was a revolution. Thousands of people came to the television. At 5 o'clock in the morning, there were more than 5,000 or 10,000 people outside the station because they wanted to get in, because they were so excited with these videos. And after that show, nothing was the same for me in my life. I received many invitations from different universities in Mexico. Then I received invitations from international congresses around the world, and I couldn't get away. I couldn't get away anymore. Then I started, even without even thinking, to get so much involved, because people send me videos and hundreds of videos of UFOs. And then I realized that this was very important. This was a new phenomenon, a phenomenon inside the phenomenon, where people were recording these things with cameras, because everybody had a camera now. Or many people had a camera, VHS, back in 1991. And I thought, with the development of technology, more and more and more people are going to have cameras. And then I said, well, I am very sure in the future, everyone is going to have a camera, and we will be able to have many more videos, many more evidences. And I started to promote people to watch the sky. When they had time to watch the sky and record whatever it was there. I never thought this was going to be successful. But I received one video recorded by one person, and then another, and another, and another, and then dozens, and then hundreds, and then I didn't know what to do with so much evidence I had. And 1995 ended 60 Minutes, and I received more and more invitations to present conferences. And I went all around Mexico, and I mean all around Mexico, presenting all the evidences with full theaters, and I'm talking 1,000 people, 2,000 people, everywhere. And I couldn't escape anymore. And then I became the center of this phenomenon in Mexico. In 1997, I started a show, Tercer Milenio, in Televisa, that lasted until 2003, then went out of the air.
Tercer Milenio, periodismo hacia el futuro. Con Jaime Maussan.
Bienvenidos a Tercer Milenio, periodismo hacia el futuro.
That Televisa, the huge network, the national network in Mexico, asked me to come back and present Tercer Milenio in 2004.
Estamos ante una realidad que cambia, que evoluciona, que cada vez está más cerca de nosotros. Mensajes claros que aparecen en los campos de trigo en Inglaterra que no pueden ser considerados obra de algunos bromistas. Nuestra labor ha sido llevar esta información hasta usted, acercarla, estar cada vez más cerca, que nos demos todos cuenta que estamos viviendo tiempos extraordinarios. Estos son los tiempos del encuentro. Ha llegado el momento, el tiempo de aceptarlo.
And I did it. And I've been on the air since 2004 until now. A very successful show. Now it's running in a different network, also a national network, Azteca, and we have even grown in numbers, in ratings. For around 2 million people watch the show every week, which is probably should be considered the most successful show on UFOs around the world.
UFOs have been the stuff of conspiracy theorists for decades, often mocked for talking about it, but maybe they shouldn't be mocked. Commander David Fravor spent 18 years as a naval aviator, a pilot. In 2004, he had an unforgettable encounter with an aircraft he said was defying the laws of physics. Former Commander Fravor joins us tonight. Thanks a lot for coming on tonight. Tell us what you saw.
Well, we had launched on a routine training mission. When we joined up, we were told that the event was going to be canceled and that we had real-world tasking, and we were sent out to the west. Now, take in mind that this has taken place about 100 miles southwest of San Diego, between San Diego and Ensenada, Mexico,
Yep.
On a clear, perfect day, blue waters. We get out to the spot where they tell us it's at. We start looking around, and both airplanes see a disturbance in the water and a white 40-foot long tic-tac shaped object just hovering above the water, going forward, back, left, right. There's no rotor wash, there's no wings, nothing. So as we drive around in a clockwise flow, we get to about the 9 o'clock position, and I said, well, I'm going to go down and check it out, and the other jet is going to stay high. So as we go down, when we get to the 12 o'clock position, it starts to mirror us. So it's in a clockwise flow, and it's on the opposite side of the circle from us. And we continue this. It's in a climb. We're in a descent. We're getting a great look at it. This whole thing takes about probably up to 5 minutes from the time we show up. I get over to the 8 o'clock position. It's at about the 2 o'clock position, and I decide I'm going to go and see what it is, and it's about 2,000 feet below me. And I cut across the circle, and as I get within about a half mile of it, it rapidly accelerates to the south in about 2 seconds and disappears.
What would you estimate the speed?
Oh, well above supersonic. It like a bullet out of a gun, it took off.
So from what you know about aerodynamics, mechanics, physics, should this be possible, what you saw?
Not with the technology that we have today. Not at all.
Even now, even 13 years later, is there anything that you know of capable of this kind of behavior?
No, there's nothing I know of. I mean, when we saw the video with the IR, it has no exhaust. No discernible things of anything form of propulsion. And this thing came from a dead hover over the water, just kind of moving around, to a climb up to about 12,000 feet to rapidly accelerating away in a climb, and in less than 2 seconds it was gone. And you figure you're talking 50 miles of visibility, and you can easily see an object that size easily out to 10 miles, and it just disappeared in seconds.
What would be the effects on a human pilot of the G-forces involved in that altitude change?
Well, the altitude wouldn't be bad. It would be the acceleration of the object.
Right.
Honestly, I wanted to fly it.
Yeah,
but,
I bet.
There's, talking to some physicists, they don't think the human body could handle that kind of force with that acceleration.
It doesn't sound like the human body could. So bottom line, what do you think this was?
I believe, as do the other folks that were on the flight when we visually saw it, that it was something not from this world.
When presumably you expressed that belief to your superiors, what did they say?
Actually, we caught a lot of grief getting back to the boat, and it got passed off as an event that no one could explain. Now, keep in mind, they had been tracking these for 2 weeks prior to us seeing it, and this was the first time that manned airplanes had been airborne when the objects appeared.
This feels like a really big story to me. It's not exactly clear why Vladimir Putin's more interesting than this. I think this seems like a big deal. And Commander, I appreciate your taking the time to talk to us about it.
En un momento fueron rodeados por estos objetos.
Según la información que escuché en la cabina del jefe de coordinador de operaciones, llegó un momento que él llevaba pues la visualización de la operación en las pantallas, y mencionó él que se encontraban en la parte posterior, al lado izquierdo y enfrente de nosotros. Entonces fue en ese momento que sentí un poco de tensión.
Pero a pesar de ello nunca los pudieron ver.
Nunca pudimos identificarlo visualmente, a simple vista nunca.
O sea que solamente a través del FLIR fue posible detectar la presencia de estos objetos.
Sí, únicamente con el sistema FLIR infrarrojo precisamente.
Es decir, eran invisibles a la vista.
Yo considero que sí, porque ninguno de los tripulantes pudimos observarlo a simple vista.
¿A la distancia en la que se encontraban deberían de haberlo hecho?
La distancia más cerca que tuvimos, que fue de 2 millas, un objeto normal o una aeronave normal, la experiencia nos dice que la podemos identificar. Entonces fue la duda que nos queda en esa operación.
Back in 2004, the Secretary of Defense in Mexico called me to deliver a video to me. They recorded this video on March the 5th, 2004, close to the Campeche area, but the plane was in the middle of the jungle. They were able to record these lights following the airplane. 11 lights following the airplane. The Mexican scientists went to the television to say that they were, lightning or energy in the air. Ball lightning. 11 ball lightning following and surrounding an airplane. They went to the Secretary of Defense later and said, "Oh, we are sorry. Oh, we were wrong. Sorry." But they never said that publicly. You see? But they know they were wrong because the Secretary of Defense wouldn't deliver a video of UFOs if he knew was something else. Then I can tell you that proves that in Mexico even the authorities are ready to accept this. The only reason we don't do it is because we don't want to confront the U.S. We don't want to confront the scientists from the U.S. because they would make fun of the Mexican government and they would make jokes about that, and nobody's ready for that.
Me está marcando 206 de velocidad y lleva un rumbo 301.
Aquí va, aquí va. Ahí va. Ahí va.
¿Y por qué hasta ahorita lo agarras?
¿Qué es Juárez? Juárez, ¿qué es?
Un punto, ahí está.
Está exactamente atrás de nosotros.
Es correcto, ahora está a las 7 de nuestra posición con 10.5 millas. Lleva rumbo 283 y 334 de velocidad. Bueno, estoy a punto de perderlo ya en el radar, ya está a punto de salir.
Ok. Qué barbaridad. Bueno, pues ni modo. Fue contacto radar y...
31.8 millas ahora y lo estoy perdiendo.
Ok.
Ahí supuestamente debe llegar a Carmen.
Ya no lo tengo en la pantalla, pero me sigue marcando a la distancia el radar a 37 millas.
Ahora sobre Carmen. Ahí mínimo Carmen lo debe de ver.
Sí, deje checo.
A las 7, a la misma altura.
Hay unas nubes, ahí se debe de ver.
A ver,
Aquí estamos viendo, hay algunos aspectos importantes a comentar, además del audio de los integrantes del Escuadrón 501. Usted ve estas dos luces muy grandes y abajo de ellas un punto menos luminoso, pero es ahí donde está marcando con una X el máximo calor, es decir, el punto de energía más grande de esas luces es precisamente el punto de abajo.
A ver, ¿qué tenemos?
Nada, señor. A ver, permítame, déjale busco.
¿Y nosotros?
Comandante, ¿qué es eso?
¿Qué distancia más o menos lo tenías, Telles?
Oye, a ver, abusados, es como...
Ahí van más, siguen más atrás. Son 10, 11 objetos.
Otro aspecto importante es que vemos que los objetos están en movimiento para aquellos que sugerían que estos eran en realidad pozos petroleros, que eran los quemadores de pozos petroleros. Pero podemos ver ahí con toda claridad como punto de referencia a las nubes y a los objetos en movimiento. Es decir, el avión está de alguna manera, se mantiene más o menos estable y los objetos pues manifiestan este movimiento mientras que las nubes parecen quietas. Otro aspecto muy importante, quiero que usted vea los números que están a la izquierda de su pantalla. Ahí va a haber un 0. En el 0 ve una pequeña flecha. Esa flecha está indicando la inclinación de la cámara FLIR.
Ahí van.
3, 4, 5, 6. Con 6.
Es decir, que está literalmente en el horizonte, no está enfocada hacia el suelo, está literalmente viendo hacia el horizonte. Y el avión volaba a 3.500 metros de altura.
Y van a una velocidad, pero 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 en la pantalla.
Síguelo, no lo cierras.
¿Están a la misma altura Telles?
Afirmativo.
Poquito, arriba.
8, 9, 10, 11 contando toda la cola. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11.
Ok, no sabemos qué estamos viendo, son unos objetos nada más luminosos que vienen a la misma altura que nosotros, pero no podemos saber qué distancia.
¿A qué distancia a qué posición lo tienes, Telles?
A las 8. A las 8, 9.
A las 9, no creo que lo agarre el radar, tenemos un ángulo ciego ahí, oiga.
Bueno, ese es uno, pero aquí tenemos otro a las 9.
Otro a las 9.
Ah, aquí tengo uno, a ver, déjame checar el de las 9.
Y adelante van otros dos.
Y son los mismos, ¿eh?
Los tenemos adelante, en medio y a las 8 de
ahora, póngase los cinturones de seguridad.
No me espate.
Si pueden checar por la ventana, tenemos uno que va aproximadamente a la 1. Y los demás pues siguen a las 9.
¿O sea que los tienen rodeado?
Pues no sé.
¿A qué distancia?
Aquí nada me indica el del radar.
Jóvenes, hoy es su día de suerte. Jóvenes.
No estamos solos.
No estamos solos, de veras. Qué cosa tan rara, ¿eh? Nos están rodeando.
Oye, ¿qué tienes a la 1?
A la 1 lo tengo a 14.8 millas, a la 1 con rumbo 99 y 52 de velocidad.
Es el que él está siguiendo uno, yo estoy siguiendo el otro.
Ok, lo tiene el radar, lo tiene el FLIR, lo estamos viendo en el FLIR. Es un objeto luminoso. Lleva rumbo contrario a nosotros, pero no nos deja. Está 2 millas atrás de nosotros. No se nos separa, es más. No se separa. Fíjate lo que no detectó el radar en toda su vida, ahorita lo está haciendo.
Qué raro,
I received a call from the Secretary of Defense in Mexico. He asked me to come. I had an appointment. I went there. I sit down in an office. Nobody was there. And when I realized I was in the drug traffic, from the military administration, from the military, and I said, Jesus Christ, what happened? Did somebody say that I did something? What I'm doing here? I have to go. I have to go. This is not good. And then they came and said, Mr. Maussan, can you come with us, please? And I said, Jesus Christ, what is going to happen now? And they took me to a little theater, and they put the video, and they just said, can you explain this, please? And I saw it, and I said, Jesus, are these things following the airplane? Yes, and they surrounded the airplane. Yes. Can I talk to the pilots? No, first tell us what you think. And I said, well, I think they are UFOs. The video had been recorded with a FLIR camera. This camera was, in 2004, just for the military. It was a very specialized camera that could track the infrared and could track the heat in the airplanes. They were using this camera in this airplane because they were looking for narcotics, from drugs from South America, and they were in the area where is the shortest in Mexico from coast to coast, and the airplanes had to go through there, and it was fairly easy to track these drug dealers, and they used this special equipment. And the military saw these lights. They couldn't see the lights with their eyes. They just saw it with the camera. But they knew they had a screen in the airplane, and they were looking at the screen, even though they couldn't find it in the air, in the atmosphere. It was in the camera, and they got very nervous, especially when they were surrounded by these lights. The captain turned off the navigation lights because he thought he was going to be confronted by these UFOs. Then some people came and tried to explain that video, saying that they were oil rigs.
Letting off fire.
Exactly, and some other things, some missiles, and so many really crazy things. But the military were there every day for many hours in the same place, and they never saw something like this. And they couldn't explain it. When I told them that these were UFOs, they said, okay, thank you very much, Mr. Maussan, and I left. They didn't tell me anything else. I received a call again a couple of days later, and they say, the Secretary of Defense wants to see you personally in his office. I went there, and then he asked me, what do you think they are? And I said, UFOs. Can I talk to the crew? You will. You will. You are going to be the only one who is going to do that. I'm going to give you the tape. You can do whatever you want. Just remember that you have the honor and the pride of the Armed Forces of Mexico in your hands. Be very careful.
Al hacer un viraje, ya para enfilarnos hacia Campeche, el operador de la cámara FLIR detectó un blanco sin forma, únicamente brillaba, se detectó con la cámara infrarrojo y siempre se le estuvo observando con esta cámara. Más adelante vimos otros blancos hacia el costado izquierdo de la aeronave. Me parece que eran 11 blancos. Nunca los tuvimos a la vista.
En este caso, estos 11 puntos que producían calor y que se ven a través de las imágenes del FLIR, podemos suponer entonces que a pesar de que no se veían, ahí estaban.
Ahí se encontraban y se tenía referencia por las posiciones que siempre estuvieron a la izquierda de nosotros, volando a la misma altura y aproximadamente a la misma velocidad. Pues se jugó con las ganancias tratando de encontrar una imagen, y en todo momento se mantuvieron puntos calientes completamente.
¿Muy calientes?
Muy calientes, o sea, no se encontró una forma irregular, o sea, siempre fueron círculos.
¿Esto es irregular con respecto a aeronaves que usted haya detectado anteriormente?
Sí podría ser irregular porque no se tenía forma, no tenía forma alguna de algún objeto que yo haya visto con anterioridad.
Es decir, este suceso, usted no tiene antecedentes previos a algo similar.
Nunca me había pasado y es algo así que pues no sabría qué decirle, qué era. No tendría algún objeto que pudiera relacionar con esto que sucedió.
If somebody asks you who gave you this video, I thought, oh, he's going to say, you don't know who gave you this. You are going to say that the Secretary of Defense gave you this video. And I said, Jesus Christ, my pants almost fell down. I had this evidence, they have given me this evidence, and the Secretary of Defense of Mexico was supporting me, whatever I did with this. I felt a big responsibility. I investigated everything I could with this tape. I had a chance to interview all the crew, the captain and the cameraman and everyone that was inside the plane, and all of them told me, this is real, we've never seen anything like this. And then I presented this video in a national television program in Mexico, in the newscast, in the most important newscast, on May the 9th or the 10th of 2004. Next day, I gave a press conference, and all the international media came to the press conference. I gave them this video, and next night, or that night, it was everywhere around the world, in every single newscast. I don't think there is a sighting of UFOs that has been presented everywhere like this happened in 2004. And then I thought that I had done my job the best I could. I never expected that the explanations that were going to be given to this video, incredible video, were going to be so stupid as they were.
El 5 de marzo del 2004, en un vuelo sobre Campeche, la torre de control de la Fuerza Aérea Mexicana se percata del avistamiento de varios objetos luminosos. En mayo de ese mismo año, nuestro director Jaime Maussan, después de una estricta investigación, en conferencia detalla lo que aconteció. Objetos que no aprecia el ojo humano ni la lente de una cámara en espectro normal, pero que son captados en infrarrojo o cámara FLIR. La ufología sumó este video a la hipótesis sobre los ovnis invisibles y en México dio pie al desarrollo de un proyecto del que se asegura confirmó dicha hipótesis. Y es Pedro Ávila, director de los Vigilantes del Cielo, quien crea un mecanismo basado en dos cámaras, una con visión normal y otra en infrarrojo. Estas se encuentran montadas, apuntan al mismo objetivo, con igual calidad de zoom, pretendiendo una imagen encuadrada, logrando así un sistema de grabación paralela, donde un aparato logra captar lo que el otro no. Es decir, aquello de lo que el ojo humano no se percata.
Empiezo a hacer algunas pruebas, empiezo a ver el cielo, a tratar de captar las cosas que ahí se mueven y empiezo a percatarme que sí hay objetos invisibles al ojo humano, que no son detectados tampoco por la cámara normal y que solamente a través de la cámara infrarroja se pueden captar. Ahí está, es un punto luminoso, no es un reflejo porque vean, muevo la cámara hacia la derecha, regreso a la izquierda, ahí está, bajo, subo y ahí sigue. Lo curioso es que con los binoculares no lo puedo ver tampoco. Voy a tratar de hacer un acercamiento, a ver de qué se trata, ya que esta es una ruta aérea. Por ahí se escucha un avión, voy a guardar silencio para poderme acercar a él. Uy, se está apagando, se está apagando. Uy, ya se apagó. Ah, caray.
Y fue en julio de ese mismo año donde para muchos este video confirmó lo que anteriormente solo se especulaba.
Y entonces demuestro al mundo de que esto es posible. de que se pueden captar imágenes de objetos invisibles al ojo humano a través de la visión infrarroja. Cuando yo desarrollo esto, un grupo de franceses, algunos científicos y algunos otros investigadores, crean 3 programas de investigación. Incluso crean una especie de un observatorio especial para grabar ovnis de esta manera y todo. Y al programa principal le ponen mi nombre en honor a lo que yo hice con este descubrimiento.
Y en la página principal de The Europe UFO Survey se encuentra la descripción de este mecanismo, además de un reportaje en su canal de YouTube en honor a Pedro Ávila, quien desde su habitación diseñó este mecanismo y ha registrado en el Instituto Nacional de Derechos de Autor.
Y a mí me da mucho gusto que sea una aportación mexicana, porque bien sabemos que México es punta de lanza de todo lo que tiene que ver con el fenómeno ovni.
Técnica de videograbación simultánea en espectro normal e infrarrojo. Ese es el nombre oficial de este sistema, un desarrollo de Pedro Ávila, un mexicano que vigila el espacio aéreo. A él se le atribuye la paternidad del mecanismo que se asegura es una herramienta para la investigación del fenómeno ovni a nivel mundial.
Bueno, primero que nada me da mucho orgullo saber que lo que yo estoy presentando es algo real, es algo verdadero.
A Pedro Ávila, director nacional de los Vigilantes del Cielo, quien desde esta pequeña ventana ha logrado videograbar los objetos voladores no identificados más sorprendentes, se le atribuye la paternidad y autoría de este sistema, llamado oficialmente técnica de videograbación simultánea en el espectro normal e infrarrojo.
After I learned that there were UFOs that were invisible to the eye, I proposed that idea on television. And Pedro Ávila, a UFO hunter who cannot walk, he's in a chair, he's looking to his window all day long, built a device to put 2 cameras, one infrared and one normal spectrum. And he was able, it's the only time that this has ever been done everywhere, where you have a camera recording in the normal spectrum and the other camera in the infrared. And you can see this object in the infrared and you cannot clearly see anything in the normal spectrum, proving that there are UFOs that are not visible to the eyes, to the sight. And I think that was very important. From then on, more and more people, and with the development of technology, even the FLIR technology now available to many people, to almost anyone who wants to have a FLIR camera, now you can have it. And now many people are recording these invisible to UFOs everywhere, and it is just amazing. And we are proving now that what was said 15 years ago with the military in Mexico is happening in many, many places right now.
Jaime Maussan has a multifaceted story that spans the overarching theme of ET visitation. He has coordinated the investigation of the Tridactylos beings in Peru, and that could become the most important finding that has been made on the theme. His story will continue, and so will Beyond the Spectrum.